Searing pain shot up her leg, but delivering an apology to Chicago's most ruthless crime boss took priority over the wet warmth seeping into her sensible shoe. She burst through his mahogany doors in a heavy, breathless panic, a frantic excuse spilling from her lips. But the moment his cold, calculating gaze dropped to her swollen, bleeding ankle, everything changed in an instant. Breath tore through Daisy Mitchell's lungs like shattered glass. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs as she practically dragged herself up the sprawling limestone steps of the Bianchi estate. At 28, Daisy was a woman who took up space, a fact she usually embraced with colourful vintage dresses and a confident plush silhouette. But today, her size felt like a liability. Her thick thighs chafed against the damp fabric of her skirt, and sweat beaded at her temples, gluing strands of dark brown hair to her cheeks. She was exactly 42 minutes late. For a normal client, 42 minutes was an annoyance, worthy of a discount on their next tailored suit. For Lorenzo Bianchi, 42 minutes was a profound insult. Lorenzo wasn't just a wealthy venture capitalist. He was the undisputed head of the Chicago outfit, a man whose whispered name could empty a crowded restaurant on Rush Street in seconds. And Daisy, a bespoke tailor, struggling to keep her late grandfather's shop afloat, had just kept him waiting. "Miss Mitchell." A towering guard named Matteo said, his voice a low rumble as he opened the heavy oak doors. His eyes flicked down, registering her disheveled state, but his expression remained carved from stone. "He is in the study. I suggest you don't make him wait a second longer." I know, I'm so sorry," Daisy wheezed, clutching her heavy canvas measuring bag to her chest like a shield. Every step she took sent a white-hot spike of agony shooting up her right calf, but she bit the inside of her cheek until she tasted copper, forcing herself to walk as evenly as possible. The study was a cavernous room, smelling of aged leather, expensive scotch and cedar. Behind a massive mahogany desk sat Lorenzo Bianchi. He didn't look up immediately. He was signing a document, his movements slow and deliberate. He wore a crisp white shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle and faded ink. He was terrifyingly handsome. Sharp jaw, dark olive skin, and eyes the color of a stormy sea. 42 minutes, Miss Mitchell." Lorenzo said, his voice a smooth, dangerous baritone that sent a shiver down her spine. He finally looked up, his gaze pinning her to the spot. "My time is not a commodity you can afford to waste. Mr. Bianchi, I am deeply, incredibly sorry." Daisy rushed out, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to keep it steady. "There was an incident on the subway. A delay. I tried to call, but my phone died, and I had to walk the last 10 blocks. Stop!" The single word cut through her frantic rambling like a blade. Lorenzo leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. His piercing eyes swept over her. He took in her flushed face, the rapid rise and fall of her generous chest, the way her soft, curvy frame trembled under her heavy wool coat. Usually men of his stature looked right through her, preferring the skeletal plastic socialites that decorated their arms. But Lorenzo's gaze lingered heavy and analytical. "You're sweating," he observed coldly, "and you're breathing like you just ran a marathon." "I walked very fast," she lied, shifting her weight to her left leg. The right one was throbbing so violently she feared she might vomit. "Take off your coat. Let's get these measurements over with. I have a meeting in 20 minutes. He stood up, towering over 6 feet, radiating a quiet, lethal authority. Daisy nodded quickly, her clumsy fingers struggling with the buttons of her coat. She draped it over a nearby armchair, revealing a fitted emerald green dress that hugged her soft stomach and wide hips. She reached into her bag, pulling out her fabric measuring tape, her hands shaking. She took a step toward him. Her right foot met the hardwood floor, and her ankle gave out completely. A sharp cry escaped her lips as her knee buckled. She braced herself for the harsh impact of the floor, but it never came. In a flash of movement so fast it blurred, Lorenzo was there. His large, calloused hands gripped her waist, his fingers digging slightly into the plush softness of her hips, arresting her fall. "Careful," he murmured, the anger in his voice suddenly replaced by a sharp, focused intensity. "I'm sorry," she gasped, her hands instinctively clutching his broad shoulders to steady herself. The smell of his cologne, bergamot, and smoke was intoxicating. "I'm so clumsy today, You're bleeding." Daisy froze. Lorenzo wasn't looking at her face anymore. He was staring at the floor. She followed his gaze. A small, dark red droplet had soaked through the sheer fabric of her black pantyhose, staining the polished floorboards near her sensible black pump. Before she could protest, Lorenzo smoothly lowered her onto the leather sofa. He didn't step back. Instead, he knelt on one knee in front of her, an action so surreal it made Daisy's breath hitch. "Mr. Bianchi, please, you don't have to." "Quiet," he commanded softly. Without asking permission, he reached out and gently removed her right shoe. Daisy hissed in pain. Her ankle was grotesquely swollen, the skin strained and angry. But that wasn't what made Lorenzo's jaw clench. Just above the hem of her shoe, visible through the snagged nylon, was a brutal, purpling bruise. It wasn't a scrape from a fall. It was the distinct, undeniable shape of large, violent fingers. A handprint. The silence in the room grew thick-heavy with sudden, suffocating danger. Lorenzo's thumb lightly traced the edge of the bruised skin, his touch shockingly gentle compared to the cold fury radiating from his eyes. He looked up at her, his expression entirely unreadable. "You said there was a delay on the subway." Lorenzo said, his voice dropping an octave, slipping into a terrifying, deadly calm. There was—" Daisy stammered, her heart threatening to beat out of her chest. "Subways do not leave finger marks on a woman's calf, Daisy." It was the first time he had used her first name. It sounded like a possessive claim. "Who did this to you?" "No one. I tripped. I fell against a turnstile." She tried to pull her leg back, but his grip on her calf, while careful to avoid the bruise, was like an iron vice. "I am a man who deals in violence every single day of my life," Lorenzo said softly, looking directly into her wide, terrified eyes. "Do you honestly think I cannot recognize the grip of a man who tried to drag you down?" He stood up smoothly, pulling his phone from his pocket. "Matteo!" The door opened instantly. "Yes, boss?" "Cancel my afternoon meetings," Lorenzo ordered, not taking his eyes off Daisy. "Call Dr. Evans. Have him come to the estate immediately, and find out exactly what happened on the corner of 4th and Elm, outside Miss Mitchell's tailor shop, an hour ago. Pull the street cameras." "Mr. Bianchi, no." Daisy panicked, trying to stand, but the pain forced her back down into the cushions. "Please, you can't. If you look into this, he'll kill me. He said he would." Lorenzo slowly pocketed his phone. He walked back to the sofa, leaning over her, until she was caged between his arms. He looked at her soft, tear-streaked face, his gaze dropping to her trembling lips. "No one," Lorenzo whispered, his voice dark and absolute, "is going to touch a single soft inch of you ever again. Now tell me his name." The name tasted like ash in Daisy's mouth. "Braden," she whispered, the tears finally spilling over her lashes, tracing hot paths down her flushed cheeks. "Braden Hayes." Lorenzo didn't react physically, but the temperature in the room seemed to plummet. He pulled a pristine white handkerchief from his breast pocket and gently wiped the tears from her face. The contrast between his lethal reputation and the tender, almost reverent way he touched her skin made Daisy's head spin. "Your ex-boyfriend," Lorenzo stated. It wasn't a question. "How do you— I had you thoroughly vetted before I allowed you inside my home, Daisy. I know you inherited Sartoria Mitchell from your grandfather. I know you work 80-hour weeks. I know you prefer vanilla lattes, and I know you broke up with a low-level degenerate named Braden Hayes 6 months ago." Lorenzo's eyes darkened, a storm brewing in the grey depths. "What I don't know is why a man I already investigated and dismissed as a pathetic gambling addict felt bold enough to put his hands on you today." Daisy swallowed hard, ashamed. She hated this. She hated feeling small, weak, and pathetic. She had spent years building her confidence, learning to love her full figure, her thick thighs, and her soft belly in a world that constantly told her to shrink. Braden had always made her feel like a burden, constantly belittling her size while happily draining her bank account. "He owes money," Daisy confessed, staring down at her ruined pantyhose. "A lot of it. He showed up in the alley behind my shop when I was leaving for this appointment. He demanded I sign the deed to the shop over to him so he could sell the building. When I said no, he got violent. He grabbed my leg to stop me from getting into my cab. He yanked me backward and I fell on the concrete. The cab driver yelled and Braden ran off. I couldn't be late for you. I knew what it meant." Lorenzo was silent for a long time. He stared at her, absorbing her words. This beautiful, full-figured woman, bleeding and battered, had dragged herself across the city to measure him for a suit because she was terrified of his reputation, yet she was fiercely protecting her own legacy. He felt a strange, primal possessiveness coil tight in his gut. He was surrounded by people who feared him, women who threw themselves at him for his money. But this woman, she was raw, real, and unapologetically resilient. "You were bleeding in agony, and your first thought was that you couldn't be late for me." Lorenzo murmured, his thumb brushing against her jawline. "You're Lorenzo Bianchi," she said, as if that explained everything. "If I lose you as a client, I lose the shop. You are not losing the shop." Lorenzo straightened up as a sharp knock echoed through the room. Matteo entered, followed by an older man carrying a black medical bag. "Dr. Evans," Lorenzo greeted crisply. "Miss Mitchell has suffered trauma to her right ankle and knee. Examine her. Give her whatever she needs for the pain." As the doctor went to work, cutting away the ruined nylon to expose the ugly scraped knee and the severely sprained ankle, Lorenzo moved to the window, staring out over the manicured lawns. His mind was working at 1,000,000 miles an hour. Braden Hayes was a nobody, a rat crawling through the gutters of Chicago. But rats only bit when they were cornered. Matteo approached Lorenzo silently, handing him a tablet. "I pulled the feeds from the alley, boss. It's exactly as she said. The piece of trash threw her to the ground. But there's something else." Matteo lowered his voice so Daisy couldn't hear. "Hayes isn't just in debt to local bookies. He's into the O'Connors for 50 grand. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. The O'Connors were a rival Irish syndicate running the docks on the south side. They had been encroaching on Bianchi territory for months. If Braden was trying to steal Daisy's shop to pay off the O'Connors, this wasn't just a domestic dispute anymore. It was a matter of territory. "Where is Hayes now?" Lorenzo asked quietly. "Drinking at a dive bar on 47th. Celebrating probably thinks he scared the girl enough to get the deed. Take 2 men. Pick him up. Don't make a scene, but make sure he understands he is coming with you." Lorenzo's eyes glinted with a terrifying promise. "Bring him to the warehouse on the river." "Understood." Matteo nodded and slipped out of the room. Lorenzo turned back to Daisy. The doctor had wrapped her ankle tightly in a brace and bandaged her knee. She looked exhausted, leaning back against the leather sofa, her eyes heavy from the painkillers the doctor had administered. "Keep her off that foot for at least a week," Dr. Evans advised, packing his bag. "I've given her a mild sedative for the pain. She'll need to rest." "Thank you, Doctor. My men will see you out." Once they were alone, Lorenzo walked over to Daisy. The sedative was already kicking in, making her heavily lashed eyelids droop. She looked incredibly soft, her curves relaxing into the furniture. "I need to call a cab," she mumbled, trying to push herself up. Her thick, beautiful thigh strained against the fabric of her green dress, and Lorenzo found himself momentarily distracted by the sheer femininity of her. "You are not going anywhere," Lorenzo said easily, pressing a hand gently against her shoulder, keeping her pinned to the sofa. "You're staying here." "I can't stay here," she slurred, slightly panic-fighting through the medication. "My shop. I have orders. My cat. I will have someone fetch your cat and whatever clothes you need. Your shop will be guarded around the clock. But you, Daisy, are staying in my home until I say otherwise. You can't just kidnap me," she whispered, though there was no real fight left in her voice. "I am not kidnapping you, Tesoro," Lorenzo said softly, the Italian endearment slipping out before he could stop it. He carefully slipped his arms under her, one behind her back, the other under her plush thighs. With effortless strength, he lifted her into his arms. Daisy gasped, instinctively wrapping her arms around his neck. She was painfully aware of her weight. She was not a delicate, airy thing to be carried. "I'm too heavy. Put me down." "You weigh nothing," Lorenzo interrupted fiercely, his grip tightening securely. "You are perfect. Stop apologizing for taking up space in a world that owes you everything." He carried her out of the study and up the grand, sweeping staircase. Daisy rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady, strong beat of his heart. She should be terrified. She was in the arms of a mafia boss, effectively a prisoner in a fortress. Yet as the pain meds pulled her under, the only thing she felt was an alien, overwhelming sense of safety. Down in the city, Braden Hayes was finishing his third whiskey when the shadows in the dive bar seemed to detach themselves from the walls. Two massive men in tailored suits flanked his stool. "Braden Hayes," one of them said, his voice entirely devoid of emotion. "Mr. Bianchi would like a word about your recent investments." Braden's blood ran cold. He had no idea what he had just unleashed. But Lorenzo Bianchi had just found something worth protecting, and the streets of Chicago were about to run red because of it. Damp, freezing air rolling off the Chicago River crept through the cracked windows of the abandoned meatpacking warehouse. Braden Hayes sat strapped to a rusted metal chair, his teeth chattering uncontrollably. The dim overhead bulb cast long, distorted shadows of the two giants standing in the corner. Matteo and another enforcer named Rossi remained perfectly still, their silence infinitely more terrifying than any threat. The heavy steel door scraped open, groaning on its hinges. Lorenzo walked in. He had traded his suit jacket for a dark cashmere overcoat, turning him into a terrifying silhouette of wealth and violence. He didn't rush. Every step he took across the concrete floor echoed like a death knell. "Mr. Bianchi, please," Braden sobbed, straining against the heavy zip ties biting into his wrists. "I didn't know she was your tailor. I swear to God, if I knew she was under your protection, I never would have gone near her." Lorenzo stopped a few feet away, looking down at Braden with the detached curiosity of a scientist examining a virus. "You think my anger stems from a disruption of my wardrobe schedule?" Braden swallowed hard, his eyes darting frantically. I owe the O'Connors." Liam O'Connor gave my debt to his lieutenant, Declan Foley. "They were going to break my legs, man. They said if I got the deed to Daisy's shop, we'd be square. Why that specific building? Lorenzo asked, his voice a lethal whisper. A rundown tailor shop in a gentrifying neighborhood is barely worth half of your gambling debts. Why did Declan Foley want it so badly? Braden hesitated, terrified of betraying the Irish syndicate, but the deadness in Lorenzo's eyes shattered his resolve. The basement Sartoria Mitchell has a sub-basement that connects to the old Prohibition tunnels. The O'Connors want to use it to bypass your men at the docks. They're planning to move uncut product straight under your territory and flood the south side. Lorenzo's jaw set into a hard line. Daisy's grandfather had never mentioned the sub-basement, likely walling it up decades ago to avoid the mob wars of the past. The O'Connors weren't just trying to intimidate a helpless woman. They were trying to punch a hole right through the heart of the Bianchi Empire, and they had used a pathetic, abusive ex-boyfriend to do it. "Which hand?" Lorenzo asked softly. Braden blinked, confused. Which hand did you use to grab her leg? Which hand bruised her skin?" I don't remember. It was an accident." Lorenzo gave a nearly imperceptible nod to Matteo. The towering enforcer stepped forward, gripping Braden's right hand. With brutal clinical efficiency, Matteo slammed a heavy steel baton across Braden's wrist. The sickening crack of bone snapping echoed through the cavernous warehouse, followed instantly by Braden's agonizing scream. "You will leave Chicago tonight," Lorenzo stated, his voice easily cutting through the wailing. "If my men ever see you within 100 miles of this city, or if you ever so much as breathe Daisy Mitchell's name again, I will personally throw you into the lake with chains around your ankles. Tell Declan Foley his tunnel is closed." Lorenzo turned his back on the weeping man and walked out into the freezing night, his mind already shifting from the brutal reality of his business to the soft, warm woman sleeping in his bed. Miles away at the Bianchi estate, Daisy blinked awake. For a moment, panic seized her. She wasn't in her cramped apartment above the shop. She was submerged in a sea of charcoal silk sheets, lying in a bed, massive enough to fit 4 people. The room was dark, lit only by the warm glow of a fireplace, and the city lights filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows. Her right ankle throbbed with a dull ache encased in a medical boot, but the sharp pain was gone. "You slept for 6 hours?" Daisy gasped, clutching the silk sheet to her chest. Lorenzo was sitting in a winged leather armchair near the fire, a crystal glass of amber liquid in his hand. He had discarded his tie, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar, making him look less like a CEO and more like the ruthless predator the city feared. Yet when he looked at her, his eyes were incredibly soft. "I shouldn't be here," Daisy whispered, suddenly hyper-aware of herself. She felt messy, oversized, and out of place in this palace of sleek lines and expensive art. She tried to pull the sheets higher instinctively, trying to hide her thick arms and broad shoulders. Lorenzo set his glass down and stood up, walking slowly to the edge of the bed. He sat beside her hip, the mattress barely dipping under his weight. He reached out his large fingers, gently prying the silk sheet from her white-knuckled grip. "Stop hiding," he commanded, his voice a low rumble that sent a tremor straight to her core. "I'm not exactly built for silk sheets and mansions, mister." "Bianchi," she murmured, looking away. "Braden always said I took up too much room. That I was too much. Braden is a dead man, walking, who couldn't handle a real woman if she fell on him." Lorenzo growled his thumb, tracing the curve of her jaw, forcing her to look at him. "You are not too much. You are lush. You are soft where the world is hard, and you have more strength in your bruised little finger than men like him have in their entire bodies. Do not ever shrink yourself in my presence, Daisy. I want every inch of you exactly as you are." A hot flush spread across Daisy's chest. No man had ever spoken to her like that. They had fetishized her, tolerated her, or belittled her. But Lorenzo looked at her with a raw, consuming hunger that made her feel like a goddess. A silver tray sat on the nightstand, loaded with warm focaccia, cured meats, and a bowl of rich tomato soup. "Eat," he urged gently. "You need your strength." Usually eating in front of a man, especially a terrifyingly handsome one, made Daisy painfully self-conscious. But under Lorenzo's watchful, appreciative gaze, she found herself tearing into the bread, ravenous. He watched her lips, his eyes darkening with a different kind of intensity. "When you are finished," Lorenzo said softly, "we have unfinished business." Daisy froze, her heart hammering. "We do. You came here to measure me for a suit." He smirked, the corner of his mouth lifting in a devastatingly arrogant smile. "I believe I am still owed a fitting. I need you to stand up straight, Mr. Bianchi." Daisy balanced her weight carefully on her left leg, the medical boot on her right foot, securely resting on the Persian rug. Despite the danger, despite the surreal circumstances, she was in her element. She held her grandfather's worn yellow measuring tape in her hands, her professional armor firmly in place. Lorenzo stood in the center of the master bedroom. He had removed his shirt entirely. Daisy swallowed the lump in her throat. The man was carved from marble. Wide, powerful shoulders tapered down to a narrow waist and a tightly corded abdomen. Scars crisscrossed his ribs, silver lines of past violence that told a story of a brutal rise to power. Tattoos of intricate dark ink curled around his left bicep and over his heart. "It's Lorenzo," he corrected her, his voice dropping to a husky register as she approached him. "Lorenzo." She breathed the name, feeling dangerously intimate on her tongue. She stepped into his personal space, the scent of bergamot and masculine heat overwhelming her senses. She brought the tape measure around his broad chest, forcing her to wrap her arms partially around him. Her generous breasts brushed against his bare abdomen, and she felt his stomach muscles jolt hard at the contact. "Chest 46, she whispered, pulling the tape taut, trying to ignore how his eyes were tracking her every movement. "You have a very steady hand for someone who was attacked today." He noted his gaze dropping to her soft, full lips. "I told you my shop is my life. If I panic, I lose it." She moved down, wrapping the tape around his waist. To do so, she had to lean in close. Her thick, beautiful thigh brushed against his leg. Instead of stepping back, Lorenzo closed the distance, his hands coming up to rest heavily on her lush hips. "Your shop is safe," Lorenzo said, his thumbs pressing into the plush fabric of her dress, marveling at her softness. "Matteo took a crew to Sartoria Mitchell an hour ago. Declan Foley sent 4 men to break down your doors and find the entrance to the basement. They did not succeed," Daisy gasped, dropping the tape measure. "They attacked my store. Is it ruined? Oh my God, my grandfather's sewing machines." "Shh," Lorenzo soothed, pulling her flush against his hard body. "Not a single window was broken. My men were waiting in the shadows. The O'Connors have been dealt with. The tunnel in your basement will be permanently filled with concrete by tomorrow morning. Your legacy is untouched." Tears pricked her eyes, but this time they were tears of profound relief. The crushing weight she had carried for months, the failing finances, Braden's harassment, the fear of losing the only piece of her family she had left, evaporated under the protective heat of Lorenzo's embrace. "Why are you doing this for me?" she asked, looking up into his stormy eyes. "I'm just a tailor. I'm just a normal heavy girl from the city." Lorenzo's hands slid up her back, tangling in her dark hair. He pulled her face, agonizingly close to his. Because from the moment you limped into my study, bleeding and apologizing for making me wait, I knew you belonged to me. Because you are fierce and beautiful and soft in a world that doesn't deserve you. You are my queen, Daisy, and a king burns the world down to keep his queen safe. Before she could process the weight of his words, Lorenzo's mouth crashed down on hers. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was possessive, desperate, and completely consuming. Daisy melted into him, her hand sliding up his muscular chest to grip his broad shoulders. She pressed her full, curvy body against him, finally reveling in the space she took up, knowing that this dangerous, powerful man wanted every single ounce of her. He groaned into her mouth, lifting her effortlessly off her good foot and carrying her backward until her knees hit the edge of the mattress. The war with the O'Connors had just begun. The streets of Chicago would undoubtedly run red with the consequences of tonight. But in the center of the storm, Lorenzo Bianchi had found his anchor. And Daisy Mitchell, the curvy tailor who always apologized for being late, finally learned what it felt like to be exactly where she belonged. If you loved this intense, pulse-pounding mafia romance, don't forget to hit that like button and share this video with your fellow drama lovers. Want to see what happens next in Lorenzo and Daisy's dangerous world? Will the O'Connors strike back? Make sure to subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss a spicy, thrilling update. Drop a comment below with your favorite moment from the story. See you in the next one.